This day and time. What happened today, years ago.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you're interested in, unpack them, and really pull out the key insights for you.
Giving you that shortcut to really understanding the core issues.
Exactly. And today, we're setting our sights on the Western Front, World War I, specifically the Battle of Cantigny. That was May 28th to 31st, 1918.
Right. And, you know, on the grand scale of WWI battles, Cantigny might seem, well, small.
Yeah, just a few days.
But it was incredibly significant. It was the first major offensive fought by the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF, often called America's first stand in the war.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're using excerpts from Tron Cantigny, Fantic Chuenso, hope I'm saying that right, to figure out why this specific battle mattered so much.
We'll look at some surprising details, the bigger context, things like Allied morale, how people saw the U.S. military afterwards, and General Pershing's strategy.
Okay, let's jump in. How did the U.S. get to the point of launching attacks in France in the first place? It wasn't immediate, was it?
No, not at all. The road to Cantigny really starts with America's entry into the war. And initially, they were neutral.
Right, and that neutrality was actually pretty good for the U.S. economy, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Exports to the warring nations, mainly the Allies, more than doubled. We're talking billions in loans, too, about $3 billion to the Allies.
So a big financial stake in them not losing them. Were people debating this? You know, money versus intervention.
Definitely. There were huge risks if the Allies lost potential loan defaults, for one. But it wasn't just about the money, you know.
Strategic concerns, too.
Big ones. A dominant Germany in Europe, that worried Washington. German influence creeping into places like Haiti, the chaos after Russia's collapse, Britain getting squeezed by U-boats.
Right, the whole world order seemed potentially up for grabs.
Exactly. And concerns about U.S. interests, especially further south, in South America, if Germany became too powerful.
And then Germany started pushing things directly. Unrestricted submarine warfare, hitting U.S. ships.
That was a major provocation. And then the Zimmermann telegram. That proposal for Germany and Mexico to team up against the U.S.
That must have really inflamed public opinion.
It absolutely did. That, combined with the U-boat attacks and all those background strategic worries, it led to the U.S. declaring war on April 6, 1917.
So a mix of ideals and hard-nosed national interest.
A very complex mix, yes.
Okay, war declared. But the U.S. military, was it actually ready for this kind of fight in Europe? Our source suggests maybe not.
No, that's putting it mildly. The regular army was tiny, just over 127,000. The National Guard added about 180,000 more. Not nearly enough for a major European war.
And mobilizing quickly. That must have been a nightmare. Building an army almost from scratch.
It was a monumental task. Think about just equipping them. The source mentions the draft, the Selective Service Act, bringing in millions, eventually about 2/3 of the force.
And building the training camps, Camp Jackson, and others, just wow.
And the shortages. Soldiers training with wooden rifles initially, delays getting uniforms, boots, let alone heavy stuff like machine guns, artillery.
So early training was pretty basic, relying on the Allies.
Very much so. The British and French provided crucial early training. Pershing even set up more training centers over in France to get them ready for, well, the shock of the Western Front.
This lack of readiness really highlights why Pershing was so insistent on having an independent U.S. force, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and why early wins, even small ones like Cantigny, were psychologically so important.
Which brings us to General John J. Blackjack Pershing. His vision seems key here.
Totally pivotal. Appointed in May 1917, he immediately argued for a distinct American army on the Western Front. No ifs, ands, or buts.
But the Allies, the British and French, they were bleeding heavily. They just want bodies, right?
They desperately needed reinforcements. They pushed hard for amalgamation, basically, feeding U.S. units into their own worn-out divisions.
But Pershing resisted, with Wilson's backing.
He did. He saw the need for a distinct American contribution, both for the war and for America's place at the peace table later. He also, initially at least, believed American marksmanship and different tactics could break the trench deadlock. That changed, but...
So, Cantigny wasn't just about testing soldiers. It was testing America's ability to stand alone, militarily.
A test of military sovereignty, absolutely. Pershing had to prove the AEF could fight effectively under its own command.
Okay, let's set the scene. Spring 1918. The Western Front. What's happening right before Cantigny?
It's crisis time for the Allies. Germany launches the Ludendorff offensive, the Kaiserschlacht, a massive gamble to win before America could really make its presence felt.
Operation Michael hits the British hard in March.
Incredibly hard. Pushed them back 40 miles, threatened the key rail city of Amiens, and importantly for us, this offensive created a bulge, a salient in the Allied line.
And Cantigny sits right in that bulge.
Exactly. A German observation post on high ground, overlooking Allied lines, messing with French operations nearby.
And wasn't there another big German push just before Cantigny?
Yes, Operation Blucher-York, late May, further south, smashed through French lines, got within maybe 55 miles of Paris. Soissons fell. Things looked grim.
A desperate moment.
Truly. The Allies responded by appointing Marshal Foch as the supreme commander, trying to coordinate better, and the need for American troops became even more urgent.
So any Allied success, however small, would be huge for morale. And this Cantigny bulge, it's an opportunity for the AEF.
A critical opportunity. The first chance for a real independent AEF offensive.
Okay, we've got the buildup. America's in, Pershing wants his own army, the Allies are reeling, and Cantigny is his German-held vantage point. Let's zoom in on the battle itself, May 28th to 31st. Why specifically Cantigny?
Well, tactically, it was about eliminating that bulge, taking away that German observation post on the high ground that was hampering the French. Simple objective, really.
But strategically, for Pershing and the AEF, much bigger.
Much bigger. It was the perfect stage, you could say, to prove the U.S. Army could do the job independently. Remember those doubts about the doughboys?
Right. Could these experienced Americans actually fight?
Pershing saw it as a matter of honor. He said they needed to show the spirit and courage of veterans. Cantigny was chosen deliberately as a manageable objective to prove AEF competence.
A direct answer to those pushing for amalgamation.
Precisely. A successful American-led operation would be undeniable proof.
So who was involved? The U.S. 1st Division. The big red one.
Yep. Commanded by Major General Robert Bullard, they were considered the most seasoned U.S. division in France at that point.
And the main attaching force.
The 28th Infantry Regiment, under Colonel Hanson Ely, they had backup from the 18th Infantry, machine gun units, engineers.
Oh.
Maybe 3,500, 4,000 troops in the assault itself.
And they'd had some preparation. It wasn't their first time near the front.
No, they'd served in a quieter sector near Toul, and they actually rehearsed the Cantigny attack behind the lines. The French helped, providing photos, even building a mock-up of the terrain for practice.
That sounds pretty thorough. Who are they up against?
Okay, so initially the Germans had an elite division there, the 30th, but maybe luck for the Americans, they were rotated out just before the attack.
And replaced by?
The 82nd Reserve Division, part of the German 18th Army. Generally seen as maybe third-rate, older guys, younger recruits, less experienced.
The position itself was strong.
Very. Cantigny village was fortified on that high ground, woods around it. Good for German artillery observers. It wasn't going to be a walkover, even against a weaker division.
And the Americans had help. Significant French support.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Massive French artillery, hundreds of heavy guns and mortars. They provided the initial barrage, the rolling barrage, the infantry followed, counter-battery fire, even gas shells.
Oh, what else?
12 French Schneider tanks to hit machine gun nests. French flamethrower teams for clearing dugouts. French planes for reconnaissance and air cover.
So, really a combined operation, even if U.S.-led.
Very much a collaborative effort. It shows the AEF still relied heavily on French specialists and heavy gear, which, just strengthened Pershing's resolve to build up full American capabilities later.
Okay, May 28th, 6:45 a.m. Over the top. What happened?
After that hour-long artillery pounding, the 28th Infantry went forward. 3 waves moving behind that rolling barrage, advancing maybe 100 meters every couple of minutes.
And the German resistance?
Initially, surprisingly light. The French tanks did their job, tackling machine gun nests.
So the village fell quickly.
Relatively, yeah. Within about 30 to 45 minutes of intense fighting. Then they pushed on maybe half a kilometer east to their final objectives. Dug in, repaired German trenches, set up strong points.
And prisoners.
Took about 250 Germans in that first push.
So, a successful initial assault, but holding it. That was the hard part.
Absolutely. The Germans reacted fast. They launched, estimates vary, maybe 6 or 7 counterattacks over the next 3 days to try and take Cantigny back.
When did those start?
The first small one was quickly beaten back around 8:30 a.m. that same morning. But then the German artillery really opened up on the American positions, made things very difficult. Casualties started mounting.
And bigger counterattacks followed.
Yes, later that day around 5 p.m., then again near 7 p.m., and they kept coming on the 29th and 30th. Relentless pressure.
And wasn't there a problem with the French artillery support being withdrawn?
That was huge. On the afternoon of the 28th, that crucial French heavy artillery got pulled away to deal with that bigger German offensive down on the Aisne River,
leaving the Americans more exposed.
Much more reliant on their own 1st Division artillery and infantry firepower. It became a real test of endurance.
But they held.
They held.
Yeah.
Despite the exhaustion, the casualties, the constant shelling and attacks, they held Cantigny. Repelled every single German attempt to retake it.
That resilience, especially after losing the heavy French support, that seems almost more significant than the initial capture.
You could definitely argue that. It proved the doughboys could take a punch and hold their ground under intense pressure, just like the veteran Allied troops.
But this victory, this resilience, it came at a cost. What were the casualties like?
Significant on both sides. For the Americans, the 1st Division total casualties over those 3 days were probably around 1,600.
And killed in action.
Estimates range maybe 200 to over 300 killed. The 28th Infantry, the main assault unit, took over 1,000 casualties alone, killed and wounded. The 1st Division Museum puts it at over 800 killed or wounded for the whole division. There's some variation in numbers depending on who you count and when.
Grim figures. And the Germans.
Also heavy losses for the 82nd Reserve Division. Probably around 1,400 killed or wounded, plus those 250 or so captured in the initial attack. One report suggests they lost 1,400 on the first day alone.
It really underlines the ferocity of the fighting. For many Americans, their first taste of this scale of combat.
Exactly, and the source highlights a specific story of incredible bravery amidst this Lieutenant Oliver Julian Kendall.
Tell us about him.
Jed Kendall. He was out with his unit preparing trenches before the attack. Heavy German shelling hit them, scattered his men. He kept working alone until the Germans captured him.
And they tried to get information from him about the upcoming attack.
Brutally. Tortured him. The source mentions severe beatings, teeth broken or pulled out, but he refused to talk. He revealed nothing about the American plans.
And they killed him for it.
Ultimately, yes, slit his throat, according to reports. His silence, right on the eve of the battle, likely saved American lives and helped ensure that initial surprise and success.
What an incredible sacrifice. Was he recognized for that?
Posthumously, yes. Silver Star, Purple Heart, WWI Victory Medal, POW Medal, and there's been this long campaign, nearly a century, to get him the Medal of Honor.
Is there evidence supporting that?
German military records actually confirm they captured a U.S. officer right where Kendall was last seen. His local VFW post is named after him. It's a powerful story of individual courage.
Truly remarkable. Let's shift focus slightly to the nature of the warfare itself at Cantigny. What weapons and tech were dominant?
Well, as we've touched on, artillery was king. That massive Franco-American artillery prep, the rolling barrage, absolutely key for the attack. And the German counter barrages were devastating too. High explosive, gas shells.
And machine guns, of course, the defensive weapon of WWI.
Everywhere, suppressing fire, holding trench lines. Those French tanks were vital specifically because they could target the German machine gun nests.
Standard infantry weapons, rifles, grenades.
Springfield rifle for the Americans, hand grenades, rifle grenades for close-in fighting, clearing trenches, and those French flamethrowers for rooting defenders out of dugouts.
And poison gas, you mentioned gas shells.
Yes. Both sides used them. It was a grim reality. German gas attacks during the counterattacks caused casualties, forced Americans to fight in masks. Major McCormick, the newspaper publisher who fought there, was evacuated due to gas.
So Cantigny was an early test of combined arms for the AEF. Infantry, artillery, tanks.
It was an attempt, yes, but heavily reliant on French assets, especially the tanks, flamethrowers, and heavy guns. It really showed the AEF was still learning how to orchestrate these complex operations.
And tactically, despite Pershing's initial ideas about open warfare, this was pure trench warfare, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Attacking from trenches, crossing no man's land, assaulting fortified positions, then digging in and holding those captured trenches. That was the reality.
Facing constant shelling, gas attacks. A brutal introduction for the rookies.
A very harsh immersion into the realities of the Western Front. The landscape itself, devastated farmland, Cantigny village on its hill, turning into this hellscape under bombardment.
Our source mentions a soldier's diary, painting a grim picture. Heavy casualties, even mentions alleged killing of surrendering Germans.
Yes, that diary entry is stark. It speaks to the sheer brutality, the psychological toll, the gritty, grim, deadly nature of the war, as one account puts it, the sounds, the sights, seeing friends fall.
And the potential for discipline to break down under that kind of pressure.
It's a disturbing but important aspect to acknowledge. For soldiers expecting maybe a war of movement, this attritional trench fighting was a shock. You mentioned captured Germans looking utterly weary and disheartened. It shows the intensity affected everyone profoundly.
How did the Allies react immediately after the battle? Was this American victory noticed?
Oh, definitely, especially by the French. Remember, they were under immense pressure from those German offensives. Morale was low.
So Cantigny was a ray of hope.
A much-needed boost. Reports from the time show French relief, impressiveness at how the Americans fought. It assured the French that American divisions could be counted upon. The French press hailed it.
And Marshal Faust, the top commander.
He noted their fine ardor and fighting qualities. While we don't have specific quotes from, say, British High Command, the overall Allied mood likely lifted. It probably helped Foch feel more confident about using AEF divisions more going forward.
Makes sense. What about the German perspective? Were they worried about these Americans?
The German High Command, Ludendorff, Hindenburg, they were already worried about the potential of the AEF. That's partly why they launched the spring offensives trying to win before the U.S. arrived in full force.
Did they underestimate the Americans initially?
There was definitely skepticism about their fighting ability compared to veteran European troops, but Cantigny seems to have started changing minds.
How so?
There's that captured document from a German officer acknowledging the defeat, blamed some German mistakes, poor coordination, but also noted surprise at the American tenacity.
And recommended changes.
Crucially, yes, recommended drastic changes in handling troops to guard against a repetition of the American victory. That's a clear sign they recognized the AEF was effective.
And those disheartened prisoners also paint a picture.
Right. It suggests the fighting was intense and took a toll on German morale, too. So while small-scale, Cantigny made the German leadership sit up and take notice. They had to reassess the American threat earlier than they perhaps expected.
How was this first stand reported back home and internationally? Did the press pick up on its significance?
Massively. Media coverage was key in cementing Cantigny's symbolic importance. In the U.S., Stars and Stripes, the AEF's own paper, ran headlines like Cantigny's test of Yank fighter, proof to allies that balance of arms was in their favor.
And the newspapers back home?
They went big. New York Times, Chicago Tribune, Americans alone take town, Yanks yell we're on our way to Berlin. Huge headlines reflecting public hunger for good news. New York Times Current History ran America's first offensive a success.
And didn't Robert McCormick, the Chicago Tribune publisher who fought there, later name his estate Cantigny?
He did. A very personal connection. Shows the impact it had.
What about internationally? The French press?
As we said, they hailed it. A beacon of hope amidst the German onslaught. The British press likely reported it positively too, given Allied interest, though we don't have specific headlines here. World War history mentioned it.
And the German press?
No headlines cited, but those captured documents and reports show the German military acknowledged the U.S. success and the implications. So the reporting, especially in the U.S. and France, was widespread, positive, maybe a bit hyped.
But crucial for morale and perception.
Absolutely. It locked in Cantigny's image as a major American victory, boosted spirits at home, reassured allies, and maybe even made the Germans a bit more nervous. Its perceived importance perhaps outstripped its tactical size.
Let's talk about the lasting impact, the legacy. Why does Cantigny still matter in military history?
Well, it was the AEF's first big sustained offensive at the divisional level. The lessons learned were invaluable.
Like what specifically?
Real-world experience in planning and running those combined arms operations we talked about, infantry, artillery, tanks, flamethrowers, coordinating it all under fire.
And proving the troops could fight.
That was huge. Dispelling those Allied doubts, boosting American confidence. Plus, the sheer logistics of moving a division, coordinating with the French, keeping supplies flowing. That was a major test for the staff officers.
Even with all the French support.
Even with that support, managing a U.S. division of nearly 30,000 men in an offensive was a critical learning experience for Pershing's and Bullard's teams. Lessons on artillery coordination, communication, handling counterattacks, they used all that later at Saint-Mahou, Meuse-Argonne.
So it was a stepping stone to the modern U.S. Army structure.
You could definitely say it marked a key step in forging the modern combined arms division in the U.S. Army.
And George C. Marshall's involvement. Our source highlights him. He was there.
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Marshall at the time. He was the 1st Division's Operations Officer, G3, deeply involved in planning and directing the battle.
And it affected him personally?
Profoundly. It was his first, and actually only, direct tactical combat experience. He wrote later that Cantigny wasn't hugely important strategically or tactically.
But he downplayed it.
Tactically, yes. He called its value small. But he stressed its spiritual importance. He said the attack was ordered mainly for Allied morale.
And for the AEF itself.
Losing was unthinkable, he said. It would have crushed morale. He believed the victory, despite the high cost, demonstrated conclusively the fighting quality and tenacity of the American soldier.
So his experience there shaped his later thinking. Logistics, coordination.
Almost certainly. Facing those challenges under fire likely honed the skills that made him such a brilliant organizer later. He also saw it historically, as descendants of Europeans returning to fight for liberty. It's fascinating how this small battle influenced a giant of 20th century history.
And we keep coming back to how Cantigny helped Pershing's push for an independent AEF.
It was critical support for his argument. In May 1918, Allied morale was shaky. This win showed the Americans could deliver. It gave Pershing concrete proof against amalgamation.
Validated his stance that it was a matter of honor for them to fight as Americans.
Exactly. It boosted his credibility enormously in Allied strategy meetings, paving the way for those independent American armies later in the war.
So Cantigny becomes this powerful symbol, doesn't it? America's first major offensive, first victory, birth of the modern army.
It really does. Its symbolic weight comes from being the first divisional attack under U.S. command, proving their mettle at a critical time, boosting morale, symbolizing U.S. commitment.
And the press ran with that narrative.
Immediately. Pershing emphasized the honor angle, too. The memorials built there later reinforced it. And McCormick naming his estate Cantigny, it shows that deep personal and symbolic connection.
So even though later battles were bigger,
Cantigny remains special. The AEF's baptism by fire, the moment they proved at division level they could stand up to experienced German troops, fight, win, and hold. It forged their identity.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Our deep dive shows Cantigny, though small on the WWI map, was genuinely significant.
Absolutely. Tactically, it took out that German bulge, that observation post, and it gave crucial experience in combined arms warfare.
But the strategic and psychological impact was even bigger.
Huge morale boost for the Allies when they desperately needed it, proved the AEF could fight, and crucially, it strengthened Pershing's hand in keeping the AEF independent.
And the legacy endures.
It really marks the debut of the U.S. Army as a modern fighting force on the world stage. Taught vital lessons, helped forge future leaders like Marshall.
So Cantigny wasn't just about taking a village. It truly was America's first stand in World War I. A trial by fire that proved the AEF spirit and left a lasting mark on U.S. military history.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How these initial fights, these seemingly smaller victories against the odds, can fundamentally shape the course of larger events, and even how a nation sees itself.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.